Welcome back. This week, the Court of Appeal gave its final approval for the Crayford Farms to be sold to a Chinese investor. It dismissed an appeal by Sir Michael Fay and two Māori trusts who opposed that deal. It's a hot-button issue for so many voters, and that's despite the Chinese owning a small amount of New Zealand land when you compare the Chinese to investors from the US, Canada and Britain. But the topic did provide a pretty lively debate for students from Otago and Auckland universities who were part of a New Zealand Initiative series of debates on public policy issues. The moot that Chinese investment in New Zealand farms should be banned. Let's start with the affirmative team from Otago University.
Over the past 5 years, China has gobbled up over 150,000 hectares of New Zealand farmland. And we're very concerned about foreign investment in New Zealand, especially to do with farms, which you think are the backbone of our New Zealand society. And we say it's quite clear with foreign land ownership, obviously the profits for that ownership will go to China. I'll take a point of information.
Crayford Farms went into receivership in October 2009, owing $194 million. Why do you think this should stay in the hands of New Zealanders when the Chinese investors could run it better?
What we'd say on this side of the house, that Crayford Farms was indeed a disaster, right? We're not going to defend Crayford Farms being well run. What we would say is there was effective retribution brought against those people who own Crayford Farms, and effective control of the damage done that would be impossible to do if it fell outside New Zealand hands. Now, moving on with my speech. We'd say that countries like China don't work on the normal economic fundamentals of return. And why is that? Firstly, what we'd say is there is an overall driving goal to get food security. Secondly, what we'd say is that the Chinese Communist Party heavily subsidises these industries through very cheap credit and providing the means to give out almost as much money as they want. And thirdly, we'd say that China has massive foreign currency reserves, right? It has to spend somewhere. A place it can spend these is on buying foreign resources. What does that mean? That means the price of these land they're willing to pay for land is way higher than what it's worth. Let's have a look at China's horrendous environmental and worker standard record. We say that consumers are increasingly aware of both the safety of where their products come from and the environmental damage their products do. That matters for two reasons. One is it reflects on New Zealand, but two, worse than that, they may actually import these bad practices and habits into New Zealand. We think, given that the people who make the decisions and make the money are outside New Zealand, it's very hard to police. Buying land is different from buying a product because it shows a degree of partnership with the person in which you're buying your land. And we say that the respect and trust that partnership entails is something as New Zealand we should not be giving to an autocratic dictatorship regime like we see in China. And that's why we're proud to affirm in today's debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, of the 872,313 hectares of land sold to foreigners in the last 5 years, only 223 hectares were sold to Chinese buyers. The rest were sold to the United States, to Canada, to the UK, to Australia, and to Israel. But of all of that land that is owned by foreigners, it is only 2%, or less than 2%, it's about 1.6 to 1.8, I think, of that land is actually in foreign ownership. The rest of it is still owned by New Zealanders. So we say that the scaremongering that Kieran just brought to you in a 7-minute speech is completely unjustified. We say that, yes, it is true that Chinese investors are incredibly wealthy. They have deep pockets. The farm is worth what people are willing to pay for it. We say that's a good thing and that profit shouldn't have to be foregone by those farmers. We think, on our side of the house, that Chinese investors are actually incredibly good. And that's shown to you by the Court of Appeal approving the Crayford Farm decision just this morning, ladies and gentlemen, because they agreed that Chinese investors have a very good understanding of international trade, great expansion networks, they have deep pockets so they can keep investing if required, and they have a reputation for running and managing things really well, and they seek help when they need it. So we think that that's a very good thing.
Nicole.
I'll take you now, yeah.
Could you please explain to me what China's environmental reputation is around the world?
Okay, well, we say, first of all, that's a silly point in the context of this debate because the government still retains the ability to make laws that protect our environment, that protect our labour laws, that protect our food supply, all of these things. So just because it is a foreign investor, it doesn't mean they're not still subject to all of our domestic legislation and laws in terms of environmental protection and all of those things. So basically what they're arguing is just the pure fact of these investors being foreign or being Chinese, for some reason they shouldn't be allowed to own this farm, even though they would still be subject to the same laws. When you send the signal that we're so xenophobic in our attitude as to disallow Chinese investment in New Zealand farms, even though it would be good for our country, you send the signal that we're not open to trade, we're not open to liberalisation. And the fact that we're one of the most restrictive countries in terms of agricultural restrictions in the OECD really shows that we need to be doing a lot to push a more expansionist or a more liberal attitude in terms of our economic policy. We say we want to preserve our relationship with China because it's doing a lot for us economically. We say we would allow foreign investment into New Zealand farms because it benefits the farmers, it benefits the economy, and it benefits the investors.
Ladies and gentlemen, in decades past, it used to be a dream of young New Zealanders in rural communities that if they worked hard, they could grow up and own their own farm. And on this side of the House, we think it's disgusting that currently huge overseas corporations are bidding up the price of New Zealand land and putting it out of reach of hard-working rural New Zealanders. That's the point they didn't want to address. Generally, the idea of having rural communities, people that live close to land, we say, is very important to who we are as a people, and we're very happy to stand for that benefit as well. We don't want to see rural communities sacrificed on some vague notions of economic efficiency. Regulation doesn't always work. Kieran told you why, and they didn't respond, right? Like, in the case of the crayfish, it failed. But at least in that case, we had people in New Zealand that we could prosecute criminally to provide a disincentive. We say that when both the decisions and the profits are happening somewhere in China, some functionary in the Chinese Communist Party or some official who we don't know who it actually is, we say that that mechanism, an ability to prosecute a person to provide a disincentive, goes away. We say regulation is less effective. Moreover, we say that even if regulation is effective, consumers aren't always rational when it comes to branding, right? So the fact that China has such a horrific reputation when it comes to environmental protection, when we say there are serious doubts about their ability to provide safe food products, we say that that's something we're very sure that our competitors in the United States and in South America will be more than happy to point out if New Zealand milk is being supplied by a Chinese company. And we would challenge Josh to come up here and say with a straight face that Chinese companies have a good history of respecting intellectual property. We don't think they do. By entering a partnership, allowing them to buy and own land in our most dearly held industry as a tacit approval of some of the horrendous things that the Chinese Communist Party gets up to. We're not happy with that at all. We think sometimes you have to say enough is enough and take a stand on moral issues also. And so for all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Before this debate started, someone introduced Nick Gavey as an economics major. I find that hard to believe, given the 7 minutes of xenophobic vitriol we heard that made no economic sense. I'm going to look at the economic issues in this debate and I'll look at the principled one. So let's look directly at the first economic claim he made. So he said, profits go overseas. That's bad for New Zealanders. You're forgetting about the thing that happens before the profit goes overseas, which is the money comes in and goes to the New Zealand farmer. What happens then? That New Zealand farmer has to use it somewhere, right? It's not like he just stuffs it under the mattress. It's not like that money just disappears. The second point they made was about New Zealand farmers. They said, this is terrible for New Zealand farmers. They said they'll pay more than they're worth for these farms. At the point at which a Chinese businessman is willing to pay more than a farmer's worth, that is good for New Zealand farmers because they can sell their farm for more than it's worth and take that money and do something better. They just made all these general points about how the New Zealand dream is being lost. No one can go and live on a ranch or go and live on a dairy farm and live out the New Zealand good life. To be honest, we don't care. We don't know of any government policy that suggests, actually, we're going to stop something that's good for our country because now nobody can farm, and that's some sort of weird, nationalistic, non-explained by them type idea that we should prioritise above all policy objectives. The Chinese are going to come here, apparently, and sell our trade secrets. Every year, we have thousands of people coming from overseas to work on our farms to get those skills to bring home anyway. Every year that the Chinese people have become richer, as their middle class grows more wealthy, every year that happens, they have had similar increases in their political and economic freedoms. Yeah.
Why are you prioritising the interests of a select few farm owners than the majority of rural labourers that want a chance to own their own farm one day?
Okay, so let's talk about rural labourers. So this is another ridiculous point raised by them. They said, well, the New Zealand way of life will be ruined. Rural farmers just won't be able to continue doing the things they do. So if a Chinese company buys a New Zealand farm, it's going to have a manager. It's going to have people who work on that farm. They still have to go every day to the farm fair and buy the fertiliser or sell off cattle or do whatever it is that rural New Zealanders do. And at the point in which they engage, they just become regular New Zealanders like you or I. To suggest that a Chinese person can't do that like any other person is quite frankly racist, Nick. This debate is about fairness. Is it legitimate to deny a New Zealand farmer the ability to sell off their land at a price that is fair, that they will get more from? Or is it the case that we should deny them that right because of Nick's weird farming fetish and about national identity, which he never explained? Of course not. The motion falls.
Goodness me, I feel exhausted watching that. The judges said it was a tough call, but in the end, the debating team from Auckland University, negating the moot, won that debate. They'll go through to the final in Wellington next week, debating whether there should be higher tax rates imposed on the rich. You might have a view on that yourself.